All right. So we had a great intro by Raj, but let's take a quick second and have the panelists talk about what their company does, just to make sure you know who you're hearing from. So start us off, Neil.
Sure. So my name is Neil Straghalis. I work at Intuit down in Mountain View. We make small business and tax software and personal finance. I work with our small business team, managing the team that does all the design for our care and support systems and also marketing, and I partner really closely with our care organization on how agents are talking to our customers as well.
Nice to meet you.
Great.
Okay,
How about you, David?
So I've basically been designing digital products and experiences for my whole career, and I run an agency called REDSHIFT in San Francisco that focuses on user experience design. We work with companies big and small, companies like Kaiser Permanente, all the way down to little startups that are designing their very first products.
Great.
Cool. And I'm Beldner. I'm the head of product design at Stitch Fix, which is an online personal styling service. And my team heads up the digital product design or user experience for our customer-facing software, and then also for our expert use and internal systems. So our stylist platform, our warehouse software, and our merchandising software.
Perfect. Okay, and to get everyone up to speed, this topic, user experience versus customer experience, let's just level set. So, Ellen, would you mind just giving us a quick blurb on what these definitions are, what this topic means?
Well, I don't know if it's a quick blurb, because there's always a lot of back and forth about what is user experience. And, typically within a company, when we talk about UX and user experience, it often refers very specifically to user-centered design, especially of digital products. But the term can also kind of expand to include what we talk about as service design, and just generally speaking, it's the process of thinking through, who are your customers? How do they engage with your service? And from sort of first point of contact all the way through to whatever your digital products are, through the entire service or experience, it's a way of thinking through that set of products.
Okay, that makes sense. And so if you all are like me, I'm trying to think, okay, what experience has been impactful to me? What has a good user design, a bad user design? And the three folks up here have thought about this a lot more than any of us have, I promise you. So what are some of the ways that you all think about, this is the experience we're trying to create? These are the trademarks of a really good user experience.
So I think for me and the work that we do at Intuit, it really starts with just understanding your customer, right? So like what does your customer need to do? What's their mindset? What's important to them? What's stressful for them? And really making sure you're taking that whole context of the customer into account so that you can design a product and a service that meets them where they need to be.
I think there are a lot of ways to answer that question, but I think at the most basic level, I think a good user experience, a good digital experience, makes your life better in some way. So it has to address some real problem or contribute meaningful value. The two words I think that we use the most when we're talking about good user experiences are simple, which is so hard to do, and probably most of our time goes into making complicated things a little bit simpler. And the second one is meaningful. In other words, that it connects to your life in the real world and improves it in some way.
That's neat. And David, I think that's very clear and very impactful on the experience that a user goes through. Do you have kind of a paragon company or website where you're just really impressed? You go there and you think, yep, these guys are nailing it. They're doing it right.
I have a lot, and I think I could give you examples either for user experience or for customer experience. But I know when the topic of the panel is the relationship between the two. I think as a professional, I'm passionate about creating great digital experiences. But as a person, I care a lot more about customer experiences. I think they're more memorable than the digital experiences that we have, because we're basically social beings, and our most important interactions are the ones with other humans. We were talking about this example last night that goes back a few years. Do we have any Instacart users in the audience by show of hands? Okay. How about web van users? Okay,
Oh,
I got one. I was an early web van user. This is going back 16, 17
Yeah, you're
years,
dating
something like
yourself
that. But it's the same idea. And, you could get online on this thing called the web, and you could look at groceries in the store, and you didn't have to go to the store. They would bring them all to you. It was fantastic. So I got on this thing right away, and I made my order. And in the agreed-upon window, the delivery person came and brought my groceries, and since it was my first experience, he asked if I'd like some help getting to my fridge. I said yes. He came up, and I'll never forget what he said next. He said, now I noticed that your ice cream has gotten a little bit soft, so I'm not going to charge you for it, but if you put it in the freezer, it's going to freeze right back up. And what's interesting about the story is that I can't remember anything about the digital experience that I had. I don't remember what the website looked like. I can't remember the checkout flow. But I'm still telling that story, and that was 16 years ago. And it's because that was the human relationship that I had with that product or service.
That's a great example,
and
yeah.
to that point, like one of the things that we talk about with good design and good digital product design is that it's invisible, right? The best designs are ones that people don't notice, that the users don't notice. And I mean, I totally agree with you about Instacart. Like, I could certainly critique the actual interface and provide, maybe this could be more efficient or better, but it doesn't matter because I love the service, and it's the service that saves me time from having to, wander through Rainbow Grocery every weekend. Have you been to Rainbow Grocery?
Not recently.
I love it, but we call it the hippies at home. So when we talk about, one of the important things about design, I think, is also who's your user and fitness or purpose. So the characteristics that make something a great consumer design, like a walk-up and use interface, are very different from what makes a great, what we call at Stitch Fix, expert use software. So for example, our stylists are using our styling interface for 20 or 30 hours a week. Our customer experience agents are using our customer experience tools, our CX tools, to help our customers, 40 hours a week. And the things that make their experience great and what makes a well-designed product for those people has to do more with efficiency, making sure that we handle every use case. How do we empower those employees to make sure that they can handle all of our customers' needs? And that's different from, our end user, where we're really focused on, let's, get them through the conversion funnel, let's make sure they have the information and the status they need. Our end customers don't want to interact with our software. They want to get their box of clothes and they want to move on.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the panel title, you've got user experience, and we've got customer experience. The missing one, I think, is agent experience that doesn't get thought about or talked about enough. But I question whether you can really have an outstanding customer interaction if your agent software tools are terrible. If the agent's own experience is not strong. And I think that that's half of what you guys do at Stitch Fix, right, is create amazing tools that people are using to facilitate those good customer conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that comes back to the sort of empathy, and we were talking about this backstage, where to build a great customer experience, you have to have a lot of empathy with your customers, and to build a great, internal employee experience or for agents, you have to have empathy with them, right? And so the ability to be able to really understand what your agent's life is like and what their job is like and what is going through their mind as they're talking to your customers is all going to affect the experience that they're then able to deliver. And I think, increasingly, companies, I think at Intuit we definitely do this, where we're looking at that complete spectrum, because a customer will move back and forth between a digital experience and then they're on the phone and then they're chatting to someone, and they are not seeing any difference between those touch points as they go through. So you have to take them all into account, and to be able to deliver that great experience through an agent, I think us as designers and inside companies need to be aware of the sort of situations that they're in and have empathy for them as well.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone would argue with that point. I mean, every stakeholder needs to understand the experience of other stakeholders to make sure that they're driving the right solution. But what are some actual tactical ways or stories of how you've been able to do this successfully?
So for me, I think we've done a pretty good job of having really cross-functional teams that are working on specific projects, so or specific problems. And so, right now there's a project I'm working on where we have a bunch of customers who are using our desktop software. We want them to move to our online software, and so we have a bunch of experiences and marketing and sales and stuff around that. And for the team looking at it, it's made up of product managers, designers, engineers, and then we have representatives from the care org as well, because they're the ones that are actually hearing from customers and helping them through this process. So they're part of the core team. We meet every week. We've done trips out to the call centers where we've listened in on calls. We do a lot of really regular looking at customer feedback that the agents are getting, and we incorporate that into our design, and it helps kind of drive roadmaps and what we're working on.
Absolutely. I'm feeling a little guilty here because I realize that we need to do that and haven't yet. Just out of curiosity to see if I'm as much of a laggard as I think. Is anyone else doing that where you actually have product teams that are working hand in hand with customer teams, forming groups, going out to customer sites? Okay, good.
Yeah.
At least I'm not the only one.
It's tough because every person in design who's a user-centered designer, they love getting the information from CX teams, right? It's such a valuable source of user empathy. And honestly, it's one of the easiest ways that we have to access the voice of the user, because these are people who are writing in and telling us about, hey, I had this issue, I had this problem. You do have to make sure, I think, as you get that data feed that's coming in, you want to make sure that you don't overemphasize certain problems. Like, you still have to validate the experiences that the customers are having, the people who are writing in, against other business metrics to make sure you're prioritizing things appropriately as you fix them. But there's a huge interest, I think, in product design teams being able to incorporate the feedback that we're getting through our CX service centers. And I think there are a lot of it has to do with organizational structure or organizational behavior. Is how do you create the mechanisms, just very tactically even, to feed that information into the right place?
Yeah, and I think the tragic thing is that as businesses get bigger, and especially as businesses get more digital, that separation gets wider and the information is more and more secondhand. So even now, we're talking about data. Data is 2 steps removed from an actual customer conversation. And I think my grandfather had a camera business in Santa Barbara. This is in the 40s and 50s. And if you were going to work in that camera store, you had to spend some time behind the counter. So everybody who was involved in a business like that, a traditional business, was seeing customers, selling to customers, dealing with customer problems. It was, part of your knowledge of the business. But it's amazing how in a lot of modern tech businesses, software companies, how few people in the company have ever had an interaction with a customer. We did a lot of work with Symantec. Huge company, 4th largest software company in the world. Very few people that we interacted with at Symantec had ever talked to a customer, much less visited a call center. And I wonder if there's something that gets lost in the data, that it just doesn't resonate in the same way that being part of that conversation, or at least witnessing that conversation, does.
And it doesn't. We're human beings. We have ginormous parts of our monkey brains that are devoted to emotionally understanding other human beings, right? And the parts of our brains that are able to process graphs and metrics and stats, it's one part of our brains, but it's not the entirety. And so when you pair that emotional experience and that empathy with the data, you get very powerful results.
Yeah,
I think that's great. I think it's admirable when companies really do focus on spending time with customers as sort of a gateway, like your parents' camera business. I was actually talking with Shopify. I don't know if Casey's still here in the audience, but I was really impressed. He was saying on his support team, it's actually the funnel for bringing talent to the rest of the organization, because as a company, they're really proud about hiring young talent that are anxious go-getters. They take time, they understand the customers, and so from the 3 months to 12 months that they spend sitting on the support desk, they bring so much more knowledge when they go work in biz dev, in product, in anything else, because they've actually had those interactions. It's very valuable to see.
I think everybody should have to do that tour of duty, and especially, I know we have a lot of folks in the audience that run call centers. I had a chance to visit a call center, for the first time in my career 5 or 6 years ago, and it totally blew my mind.
How so? What did you find?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I think it's changed the way, it's changed my attitude every time I get on the phone to talk to an agent, because without seeing it, you have no idea what their life is like. This is a call center that was overseas, so it's often, a backwoods somewhere outside of Mumbai. All the calls are taking place in the middle of the night. And what kind of shocked me, I think, you talked about empathy, and I think as designers, we're always talking about the empathy gap, and we mean, this gap between the designer and the user. But in a situation like this, you've got all these additional gaps. There's a gap between the agent and the customer, one between customer and the agent, and perhaps one between the business and the agents who are taking those calls. So here in this case, many of the calls that we got, for example, were related to credit card charges for Norton software. People calling up to find out why they'd been charged when they shouldn't have been. And we asked the agents to empathize, but of course these agents didn't use Norton software because they didn't have a computer. And by the way, none of them had a credit card. They'd never seen a credit card statement, but are talking all day long with customers about credit card problems. So I think, bringing it back to user experience, I think if we do our job really well as designers, we hopefully narrow those gaps in all directions, the ones between the business and the agents, but also the ones between the agents and customers.
Yeah.
It's funny when I think about how do you create that empathy and how do you get those stories into the minds of people making those decisions. And I think about, at Stitch Fix, we have this incredible data science team. We actually have more data scientists than engineers. And there's this group on Facebook, and it's Stitch Fix customers, and I think they're up to almost 30,000 people, and it's completely, we have no official involvement in it, but some of us are in the group, and we'll go through and, we'll see customers talking about, oh, I didn't get quite the fix that I wanted, and other customers will say, well, have you hacked your style profile? And they say, no, what's that? And one of them will say, oh, well, just knock 10 years off your age so they don't dress you like a grandma. And someone else says, have you disowned your children yet so they don't send you mom clothes? And when we send that to our data scientists, they're like, wait, people are lying in their data? And but it also creates that empathy, like, hey, these are people who are trying to get what they want out of the system, and they're kind of, pulling the only levers they have.
So obviously when you guys designed your algorithm, you want it to work in a kind of invisible, magical way. Just, I get a box and it's exactly what I wanted. But what about, has that made you think about introducing some more agency into the way clothes get selected?
Oh, well, there's a personal stylist on every single package. So what we talk about is it's algorithm-assisted styling. So, for example, our algorithms are particularly good with sizing and fit, but there's always a personal stylist who's actually selecting and putting together the box and telling the story. So
I like that, hacking it, though. I used to go and get a haircut, and the first question you'll get, which seems like an innocent question, is, oh, what do you do for work? And I learned that if you say, oh, I work in a tech company, you get a certain sort of a haircut. So now I go in and I say, oh, I'm in a band. And what do you play? Oh, I'm the bassist. And you get a better haircut that way.
Oh gosh, that must be your worst nightmare, though, thinking about your customers actually changing their information so that you can't get the right data on them. I know I was calling a company very similar to Stitch Fix, and they say, okay, well, tell me about your style. It's like, well, I don't want to talk about my style. I have horrible style. That's why I'm calling you, because I need help. So it's like, how do you combine the data with, pushing things to the edge to give someone something they want? It doesn't seem very easy. One thing, Neil, that you talked a little bit about was this very impressive collaboration that you have between the customer teams and the design experts. So that process is super impressive. Do you do any types of tools, or are there anything kind of on the data or the software side to sort of foster that communication between the two?
Nothing really heavy. I think unfortunately, like some large companies, we're quite meeting heavy, and so we do a lot of, we just do a lot of conversations with people, and people will call in from wherever they are. People are all over the country. I think we are always trying to get better at dashboards and having everybody get access to the same data. Frankly, that's always a real challenge because a lot of the metrics that the service team uses and all their systems don't tie into ones that the product teams are doing, and they are different than the ones that the web team is doing. So I think there's always a battle to get all the analytics in a kind of consumable fashion. So that's always a bit of a challenge. But I wouldn't say we do anything particularly on the technology side to bring the teams together themselves. It's been much more organizational. It was kind of, I don't want to say a mandate, but it was just sort of how we put the teams together and recognizing that there's the need for all the different voices to figure out how to solve a particular problem. But then also, like you mentioned, the empathy and how we get that empathy where it's pretty challenging. I think for us, some of the things that we've done where it's not always, it's not reasonable to have agents go observe customers using the software a lot. We have hundreds of agents. They're on the phone a lot. We can't pull them off to do so. But we've done things with customer videos where we have a set of customer videos where they're talking about their life and kind of what they're trying to do, and we share that through the agent training that we do to get them to empathize. I think where the agents are, where they're offshore, and that's a little more challenging because you have more bridges to gap. But at least here in the U.S., we've had some success in just using video and stuff like that. So that's one thing that has been has worked pretty well.
That's great.
Absolutely. We also create videos of key parts of our customer experience, and we share them out to the entire company. Mm-hmm. And that's a very effective tool. We actually work with a part-time video editor to pull together stuff from user interviews to make it communicate well to everyone else in the company.
And those are great things because people refer to them. It becomes a real person. Yeah. It's not just, like you said, it's not just a chart and this many % of customers are falling off after this part in the experience. It's oh, no, Dan, who had this specific problem, and this is the words that he used. Again, to your point, we're human beings. We respond to stories. We respond to what other people are saying. And those are the things that will stick in your employees' minds as far as oh, now I understand our customers better.
It gives you a certain degree of pride. You might work in finance or a non-customer-facing role, but when you can see your customers talking about how their life is easier, their job is easier, how they're better at their job because they're able to scale quickly with your software and use it, and it's powerful. And I think when you go into work every day, you feel okay, I'm doing something. I might not know all the ins and outs of my product. I might know all the ins and outs of my customer, but I know that on a larger spectrum, it's a Silicon Valley dream, right? Making life better, making the world better for people, and it matters. What about, so I'm going to ask you to be super honest here. What are some mistakes you've made? What's a time when you look back and you say, I really got a little bit too into the weeds in trying to design this user experience, and I blew it, and I can't believe I did this, but I will never forget this. What are kind of the battle wound stories?
Well, this stuff happens all the time. And I think a big part of UX process is actually to help us catch mistakes, ideally before they get launched. So part of the reason we do usability testing and 1% testing is to try to scale back the potential downside and risk of those decisions. And I think about actually when I was interviewing for my role at Stitch Fix about a year and a half ago, the head of customer experience was one of the people who interviewed me. And he said, hey, can you look at our checkout process? So every time a person gets a box, they check out, they tell us what they're keeping, what they're returning, and they rate each item. And I looked at what they had on the website, and I said, well, here are the 5 things that I would guess are an issue. So one of them is that we didn't have any photos of our products on the checkout. So customers would often make mistakes, and they would, say, I'm keeping this, but then they would return the wrong thing. And then it creates a little bit of a hassle, and we have to charge them back and all this other stuff. So when we were designing our first mobile app, our iPhone app, we said, look, let's get these product photos into the app. So when people check out, they know, oh, it's not this black shirt, it's the other black shirt. And so that helped us reduce the number of errors that our customer service team had to deal with coming through the app, but it had the unintended consequence of some of our users just hated this feature because they said their experience of Stitch Fix is like, oh, it's like getting a Christmas present. And all of a sudden we see this discussion like popping up on the Facebook page, like, oh, I peaked, I hate it, I didn't like this thing in my box, now what am I gonna do? And it just emotionally like really impacted the experience for some of them. And so that was an example of this unintended consequence that we had from this customer supporting feature.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think for me, just like very generally, we tend, you're in a job, you spend, 40, 50, 60 hours a week working on a particular thing, you're in an organization, it's like, it becomes consuming. You really sort of live and breathe that product. And it's easy to forget that your customers don't do that. And like their use of your product is a very slim sliver of their whole experience. And so, I think sometimes internally we overestimate the importance of our own software and the role that it plays. And then when you go talk to customers, they're like, oh yeah, I spend like, 5 minutes a week or something using this. And on one level, it's like, well, a little of you dies because you spend so much time and energy doing this, and you realize how little it may mean to someone. But at the same point, it's just good to acknowledge that, like, yeah, you need to think about their whole life, and it's not them using your product is not necessarily their whole life the way it is yours.
Yeah.
I often tell my designers, like, no one wants to interact with your digital experience, right? Like, it's an important thing to remember because they'll do things, especially for expert use, where it really matters is they'll over-design something. And I'm like, the person using this, it has to click through 15 times a day. We don't need it behind a drop-down, just, put the options on the screen or whatever the case is.
It's true, and it's so humbling. I mean, I'm listening to what you guys are saying and nodding because we make a big deal out of the digital experiences that we create. We can't help it. We love these digital experiences, but it's so easy to forget that that product experience is a tiny slice of my day, and this particular touch point is a tiny slice of that customer experience overall, and there are 10 other things going on in my life. I'll give you an example of a mistake that we nearly made recently. We were working with Kaiser Permanente to design sort of some next generation technology for inside the doctor's office. And they've got these big touch screens that they've put in the examination rooms, only nobody thought about what should go on those screens. We just knew we had to have these big touch screens. So we thought, great, we're going to put educational content, people are going to be learning about their healthcare, and I'll review my medical record, and while I'm here, maybe I'll pay my bill. Of course, nobody wants to do that. They want to watch TV or nothing because at that moment they're in an uncomfortable situation in the doctor's office with maybe
without
a screaming kid
pants.
over here. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think to your point, it's easy to think that you're the most important thing in somebody's life at that moment when most of the time you're pretty far down on that list.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Blaire, I wondered if we could actually come back to one of the topics that you brought up earlier, and I think it might be really helpful as a little bit of a dialogue here of some of the tactics that we use to bring this data from the CX team back into the product life cycle. And I know we were talking about that a little bit last night, and some of the observations that I've had, and I think coming from a design perspective, we're like, well, how do we get our priorities added to the roadmap? We have visibility into the user experience, and we don't just want to be seen as like, pardon the expression, but widget bitches and make it pretty people, because we really do think about how do we support these processes. And one of the things I think we've learned from our side is that if you have to be able to make the business case to the larger organization in the terms that the business folks understand. So, I've found that within UX, we can't just say, oh, we did a usability study and three of the participants had to reset their password or had trouble with this. We actually will say things like, well, we noticed this in a usability study, or we had a customer, come in with this experience and write us about this. And then what we do is we have to go out and seek the data to try to understand that problem actually happens to 5% of our daily visitors, and here's what we see on the financial impact. So that's one of the kind of tricks and tips that I would say, coming from a design perspective and wanting to be able to surface these issues and fix them, that we've been able to do. And I don't know how many folks in CX are able to do that type of process.
Well, it's definitely helpful because there are a lot of people in this audience who are part of or running customer-facing organizations. So if we can start to think about the metrics that we use and quantify the burden that customers are facing as a result of it and feed that back to the design team, that becomes powerful.
I think for me, where that gets interesting is a lot of times those metrics and goals are not aligned, right? Between, like if you're running a care organization and you have, you want to keep call volume down, you want to, keep agents from being on the phone too long, like all these you have SLAs that you're trying to hit. And then on the product side, you have different metrics about, what the product is actually trying to do. And sometimes those are opposed, and I think a little one that we've had is, we've been trying to increase use of our web self-help systems to keep people from calling on the phone because it's less expensive, right? And so, we hear that there may be a better experience, like if people can get the answer they need quickly without having to pick up the phone. But that leads to a decrease in Net Promoter Score because some customers really just want to pick up the phone and talk to someone, and when they can't find the number, it makes it very frustrating for them. So, those looking at how you can align those metrics, and one thing that we've really tried to do recently is our founder, Scott Cook, is passionate about customers and making sure that we're actually delivering for customers. And all of our products now roll up with key customer benefits that are the top metric that everybody's driving towards. And these are things that customers are getting out of the product, not necessarily business metrics like revenue or conversion or call volume or things. So we're all trying to track against those to see how, as an organization, we're actually delivering on things that the customer actually needs through the products. And if we're working on things that don't ladder up to those, then we have to talk about that. That's a problem.
What are those metrics?
I don't want to say, honestly. I mean, we're kind of figuring out how to actually track all of that stuff. But thinking about how saving time for a specific task, right? That's something we hear from customers a lot. It takes me so long to balance my books every month. If we can reduce that amount of time and quantify that it's taking less time for customers to do that, we know that's delivering on a customer benefit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Neil, David, Alan, thank you all so much for being here. They'll stick around for a little while if you have questions, so be sure to find them in the back. But let's give them a hand.